And that's why I came here, because I got tired of lying.
What did you feel you had to lie about?
If you ask the question, are some values better than others?
Well, clearly the answer is yes.
And if you have a university world where the implicit answer is no, any professor who can walk past that and not try to correct it is a dishonest person. Their majors are going to fall. These schools are going to take their students. And because of that, they are going to recognize that it's not just their reputations, it's their money. The rise of pornography and video games has encouraged a lot of people who are young to think that that's the meaning of life.
So what are you doing about it?
A constitution cannot be living. It's bullshit. The idea that we have taught undergrads in America that it makes any sense to say gays for Palestine is force-feeding poison. If you get the little voice in your head that is telling you to first think what they think before you can actually think for yourself, you become corrupted. And when you start to think of yourself as corrupted, you're not a scholar anymore.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction.
Let's talk about honesty. Talk to me.
Yeah, the fundamental mission of University of Austin is the radical mission to be honest. And that should not be a radical thing.
It should not be controversial either.
No, it shouldn't, but it is. At UATX, we talk about the mission in terms of open inquiry or liberty of conscience, or that we judge people on merit alone and don't do DEI. There's a lot of ways you can phrase it about civil discourse. I think all those things are true, but I don't think that's really the heart of it. The heart of it is we have the radical mission to simply be honest. And that's why I came here, because I got tired of lying. That's why I came here.
What did you feel you had to lie about, and in what context? You're laughing because a
but
lot of things, because I understand that.
Yeah. In contemporary universities, if you're asked about any of the topics of note in contemporary politics, whether it's religion or race or gender or sexuality or Israel, any of these things, everyone knows that there's a deep incentive to look around and take the pulse and look over your shoulder, and there's a script, there's an answer.
Right.
No one is honest. I've had many, many conversations with people asking them about what they said, and they tell me in private that, of course, they have privately very different views, but they wouldn't talk about them. There is a conformist answer. And
Totally.
The problem with the conformist answer is not just that it's monochrome, is that it is boring. It's humorless.
Yeah, yeah. So
it's so predictable that what's the point?
If I may inject, so I was brought up in charges for this. I was asked if race was a valid biological category or a social construct. And I said, I don't know. I'm a philosopher and educator. Go ask someone from the biology department. And I pointed, and I was brought up in charges for that.
Well, that's heretical because you didn't say the expected answer, true or not. Yeah. There's something you're expected to say.
Right. But imagine that, saying, I don't know, and you're punished for saying, like, you should be awarded for saying, I don't know.
You should be given extra points.
Correct.
Because the profession is arrogant as well as conformist. And for just admitting you don't know something, you should be given a bonus.
Yeah, I completely agree. So you felt you were placed in a situation where you had to be dishonest.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that if you don't give the conformist answer, if you don't do what's expected.
And you knew what the answers were.
Yeah, well, the answers are clear. And it is also clear that they want an illusion that all educated people have very similar opinions. Educated people don't really disagree. They're all pretty much on the center left. They all pretty much share these ideas. And that's the definition in a cultural sense of being a sophisticated person. And a sophisticated person doesn't say they don't know, and they don't say anything outside of expectation. So if you are not on the center left or the far left and engage in the only debate, which is center left v far left, if you're actually a libertarian or you're a conservative or you're anything else, you know that you are going to be criticized and given trouble. And you know that even your jokes can be reported to the principal's office.
Believe me, I know.
There's a tremendous amount of incentive just to misrepresent yourself. And let me explain a little bit why that's so wrong. Yeah. In a theological sense, it's entirely wrong because you're being dishonest to yourself. You're being dishonest to the world and your creator. You're actually refusing to look at the world in an honest way and talk about it. But if you can't do that, you say, if you get the little voice in your head that is telling you to first think what they think before you can actually think for yourself, you become corrupted. And when you start to think of yourself as corrupted, then you're not a scholar anymore. And as soon as that happens, you have to do something. And the best thing to do is to leave. But the good thing is now you have a place to go, because there now actually is a movement that allows you to speak honestly. But that didn't exist 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, you had nothing to do. All you could do is talk to your friends quietly and talk to yourself and talk to your dog. But you couldn't actually.
I'll give you the
these were
dog
your
thing.
options.
I'll give you the dog thing, but I would push back on that and say you couldn't even talk to your friends to a certain extent. And the relationship was mediated through what was politically fashionable because it was expedient. So you couldn't really develop real friendships with people because they didn't know you for who you really were. Yeah,
I think that's true, actually. When I was a graduate student, I was told that the ones who avoided the conflict were the married ones because they had this personal world on the outside. But if you became utterly absorbed in the social world of the university, then everything you're saying that's exactly right. Then everything is in a judgmental frame of the obvious opinion.
So we have a crisis of honesty. We still have a crisis of honesty.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, no, that is actually the problem. People say that the problem with universities is we don't have civil discourse. That's true. We don't have alternative opinions. That's true. We have panels where three people who look different but think the same thing say the same thing.
And we call it diversity.
Yeah, and they have questions. I used to hate this, where the norm now, is that you have to write down the questions and you give them to the moderator, and then the moderator will ask the question. Oddly, my questions never got asked. And then...
Yeah, because the purpose of the institution is to kind of promote a type of ideological conformity. It's not to seek truth. It's not to genuinely engage ideas. It's to manufacture cohesion around a certain ideological...
That's right. And to teach students that this is not only normal, but the only alternative. If they never hear the other questions, they never see the other speakers, they never meet people who are any other ideologies. If they create the illusion of conformity, all educated people are of this type, then they've won. But they are quite intentionally trying to prune everything else out.
Yeah, not only have they won, they're also convincing these kids in particular that they're better people, for never having looked at another opinion.
Yeah, that's right. And it's morally superior to already know the answer and not consider other answers, and actually ostracize people who would even dare to
we don't want to platform them.
Yeah. And it's teaching them, and this is the normal thing that is taught in political science departments throughout the United States now, that it is best if you can give the impression of moral superiority. And that is the form of knowledge of what is considered morally superior.
God, that's
then
so
you can
crazy.
You can simply say, when you hear an alternative opinion, they've been taught this way of being, that you imply that that is racist or sexist or homophobic or Islamophobic or whatever it might be, to simply eradicate it and show again your moral superiority. But it's a superiority of not having to question anything, the exact opposite of the purpose of universities. And that's why it became so frustrating to so many people. And that's why so many faculty want to come to the movement, where they know that they can think and speak honestly a bit. They can have students who will actually ask them questions. They can tell a joke in class again without being reported to the principal. That happened to me, and my department chair at the time asked me, well, why were you telling jokes anyway? I stopped telling jokes and talking about controversial things a long time ago. But in the kind of things that we talk about in politics departments, about constitutional law and about elections and about social movements and about ideologies, if you take out all the controversial things, you don't have a discipline left anymore. You don't have anything to talk about. But that's why it's become so boring, you see, because it's monochrome and humorless. And it's a sad thing. I always tell the story that when I was an undergrad, and this is 88 to 92, and it wasn't tremendously ideologically diverse, but you did find conservatives and libertarians, and there was discussion. People were willing to talk. And I saw 3 talks on campus that just fundamentally influenced me. This was University of Pittsburgh in the late 80s. Angela Davis came to speak, this famous person of the left.
Yeah.
And she had bodyguards who actually threw people out of the room for disagreeing with her. And among my friends, we were talking about whether that was legal or not, or what had we just witnessed. It was really quite something.
It's a precursor to what was to come.
Yeah, but it happened, though. That's the interesting thing.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
Angela Davis wouldn't be invited on campuses anymore. Because, it's not just about ideology. It's about keeping campuses pristine, quiet. A quiet campus is a profitable campus. So they don't want any kind of controversy. A lot of the people who run the show, the presidents and the provosts and deans of students, they do want to take out anything that isn't ideologically appropriate, but they also want to keep the campus quiet.
I love that. Ideologically appropriate. I love that.
Yeah, well, that's how they think of it. But they also want the place to function and not have trouble. They don't want students to complain. They don't want parents to complain.
Yeah.
They don't want donors to complain. So Angela Davis, even though she's on the left, she still wouldn't be brought into most campuses now because she's a problem. Then they brought in Bill Buckley, who is this remarkable person of the right. Bill Buckley would not be brought on most campuses now if he were around to do this. And then the final one.
And the excuse they'll use, is say it's security's too expensive.
Right.
We can't have them.
Exactly right. And this third one that had, these were all three within a couple of years when I was an undergrad. Final one was Mayor Kahana. And the audience may not know this one as much as the other two. But Kahana was this very controversial rabbi and member of the Knesset in Israel. And he'd been thrown out of the Knesset. And he'd been making this very clear-minded argument that Israel could not permanently be both Jewish and democratic because the Arab population was growing and it was going to become, if the democracy continued, a non-Jewish state. And his answer was to start expelling Arabs. And this was very controversial at the time. And I wanted to hear him speak. And I didn't really have strong opinions about this at the time, but I just wanted to see this. And I remember a couple things that really struck me. The one is that he had these two really tough-looking Israeli guys wearing long coats in April. And I realized they were heavily armed under
Yeah, for sure.
And which was, I was wondering if he had told the university that he was bringing armed security. I doubt that he did, but I think he also didn't care. And then during the talk, he said that he knew that for his beliefs, he was going to be killed. He knew they were going to get him one day.
Yeah.
And I thought this was just bravado at the time. But 2 months later, he was shot and killed in New York in one of the first Islamist terrorist attacks in the United States when Kahana was killed. And then that made an impression on me. All three of these did. And I thought at the time that this is what university experience was like. You come from a small town, you haven't seen a whole lot, you go to university and you see talks like this. And then you talk about them among your smart friends. This is the point. You can't do that anymore. None of those people would be invited to university campuses. There's no possible way they wouldn't do it.
What did you take from that?
Well, I took that the idea was that you were meant to be exposed to ideas that you either disagreed with or just simply didn't understand. You could say, I don't know. I have no idea about this. And,
but by the way, that's always a great response.
That is actually a pretty good one. Yeah, they say that the three words you don't hear enough are I love you. Or you've lost weight. That's the other one. But it's not either of those two things. It's I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's James Randi's quote. So what are you doing about it?
This is what we're doing. A few years ago, it got so bad that a new movement arose organically in many different dimensions. And this is the thing about UATX. UATX is the private school, I think the intellectual leader of the movement in some really important ways. But there's a very broad movement. Doesn't have a name as yet. A lot of people call it the civic thought movement. And it's UATX, it's Ralston College. But I think even in a sense, more importantly than the private universities, it is a series of schools within a school at the major state flagship universities. And now we're talking about School of Civic Leadership at University of Texas, Institute for American Civics at University of Tennessee, Hamilton Center at Florida. There's one in Arizona. There's one in North Carolina, Ohio.
Do you think those are going to succeed?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, then I'm going to push back on you. Tell me why. Well, tell me why first.
Because first of all, it's a very broad movement, and the idea of the whole movement, again, you can describe it as civil discourse, which doesn't exist on campus.
Right.
Many of them really emphasize we're going to bring in people from different sides and really speak and have civil discourse. And they teach, actually, the art of civil debate which universities are given over.
I hear someone wrote a great book on that, but anyway.
Yeah. You can frame it in terms of open inquiry, liberty of conscience, all of these things. But again, what they all have in common is the idea of a culture which allows you to speak honestly. It is the radical mission to be honest. Students eat this with a spoon. They love this. They came to university for this.
completely agree.
They didn't come to university to have someone tell them there's X opinion and you got to say it 10X times.
I completely
They came to
agree.
universities to actually meet different people and discuss different ideas and be able to make mistakes, because the nature of being an undergrad is that you say stupid stuff and then you regret it, but your friends don't mind too much.
Right,
But that's not true anymore. Now, you know that the results of these surveys at Harvard, they found out that most of the students won't speak about controversial issues in public. The faculty won't either. The faculty are afraid of each other, but the students are not afraid of the faculty. They're afraid of the other students.
Yeah, that's
because
correct.
they'll be socially ostracized.
Yeah.
So the goal of all of this movement is to create a university world, the new universities on the model of the old, meaning an open culture of discussion. But this is why the movement's going to win.
Yeah.
Goal
Why?
of the movement is not merely the 100 students that we have here at UATX or more at the schools of civic thought, at the flagship publics. It's the influence they're going to have on the rest of academia. What's going to happen? We're stealing your
It's
students.
already happened.
It's already happened. That's what we're doing. The political science majors, the sociology majors, the philosophy majors, they are going to come to the place where you can really discuss philosophy and sociology and politics. Their majors are going to fall. These schools are going to take their students. And because of that, they are going to recognize that it's not just their reputations, it's their money.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to realize that they have to adapt to us. They have to provide interesting speakers and an open environment.
I don't think.
Well, no, it won't. For a long time, it'll take a generation
Yeah.
until the money actually comes to us. But our movement is going to prosper.
Yeah.
The flagship public universities, all throughout the South, all throughout the West, all throughout the Midwest. And by the way, for people who haven't understood what happened here, a couple of state legislatures realized that the old block grant system, they didn't have to do that. You don't have to give $50 million in one check each year to the state university. You can say, we're going to give you $48 million, and then this $2 million is earmarked for the open inquiry institution, for the ideologically neutral or the conservative institution.
Yes, I wouldn't say
within the
conservative,
school.
but okay.
Well, it depends. Within the movement, it varies between fully open. It depends on what you really think the goal is. If you have a university that is fully opposed to open inquiry, fully left only, fully corrupt, what do you do with the school within a school? Do you make it balanced, or do you
See,
make it
that's-
fully
that's a good
conservative?
question.
So it is the balance.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
different schools have taken a different position on this.
Yeah.
UATX says balance, because as an independent school, UATX wants the balance. If you are the one small group within UT, do you make it fully conservative to be the balance, or what do you do internally? And there's different
Yeah, yeah.
opinions about this. But even if it is fully conservative, the students who can study a Shakespeare course that really is about the plays and not about gender in the current day,
All right.
pretending that you're reading the plays for the plays, but you're really reading it to talk about gender in the current day. And they can actually take the traditional version of it. Or in the politics courses, they can study constitutional law, as I teach it, from a balanced perspective, that the students can study. They can decide that originalism is correct. They can decide the living constitution is
Well,
correct.
so that's another
And
thing.
I actually allow
Yeah.
both of these things. I allow the argument, as opposed to how it was taught to me and how it was taught to my wife in law school. She was at BC Law, that all smart people think it's a living constitution, and that, oh yeah, there's a couple of crackpots who think something else, but let's not talk about them.
So we're not being honest about constitutional scholarship. That's another thing.
No,
right
actually,
there.
we're not. This is an area of great interest of mine.
Okay, so talk to me about that.
Yeah, I am not a single-minded con law person. Most people who study constitutional law, that's what they do. And that's not true with me. I actually study belief systems as a whole and the political consequences of belief. So I also study political ideologies and write about that, about polarization, about perceptions of facts, about many different things, but also about constitutional law. And what I really think is that because studying ideology and studying constitutional politics is all about belief systems, it's about clashing beliefs, this all makes sense. And I think I look at it in a broader perspective as not a single-minded specialist. But this has been my true experience studying con law as an undergrad when I thought it was fascinating, and then as a graduate student. And then I took some law courses in con law and whatnot. So let me tell you what I mean by that.
Yeah. Tell me about that's fascinating to me.
The living Constitution, this idea that came about in the early 1900s and came to completely dominate thought on this until the revolution on the other side with the Federalist Society.
I was going to say, contrast that to originalism.
Yeah. The idea of a living Constitution is that it means what the people now think it means. So the values evolve over time, they change over time. It's sort of an empty vessel that is filled with the contemporary beliefs of the people. And this is a real problem because then you have to ask, well, who decides what the contemporary beliefs of the people are? And they default to the Supreme Court. And the role of the justices then is to really fill it in with their own beliefs, or elites, other elites, you see. That means that law faculty and politicians can tell you what it means. They often don't bother to even read it first, because it simply goes like this. It's what I describe as the New York Times syllogism. This is the New York Times syllogism of how to understand the Constitution. If you are a person who's politically interested, or an elite in our politics or academics, are your political beliefs correct? Yes, obviously your political beliefs are correct. Have you heard the Constitution is correct? Yes, I've heard the Constitution is correct. If your political beliefs are correct and the Constitution is correct, well, then they mean the same thing. How could they not, if you're convinced both are correct? So you don't need to read it. So when it comes to something like birthright citizenship, which is a tremendous controversy in the current day, I've done this exercise many, many times with people, and they say, oh, I've heard that if you're born in the United States, the Constitution mandates that you're a birthright citizen. And I say, do you really know that to be true? And they say, yeah, absolutely. And I say, have you read the 14th Amendment? And they say, well, and I've seen it. And I say, well, why don't you read it? And the first sentence says, all persons born in the United States and born under the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And they say, see, there it is right there. And I say, oh, it's really interesting. It seems to say that with the first part and the third part. But you see that part in the middle that says under the jurisdiction thereof? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, what do you think that meant when you read it? And they said, well, I guess I don't really know. They might take a few minutes to get to that, but then they'll admit they don't know.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, what'd you do when you read that? And they say, well, since I didn't know what it meant, I just read past it. So I read that sentence that has A, B, C, just being A and C. I just read all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. And the part that I didn't know what it meant, I just left it out. And I say, see, that's the problem there, that all parts of the Constitution have meaning. And ordinary educated citizens can understand all of it. You just have to be a bit thoughtful and read a bit on it. But if you think of it in terms of the original meaning, the original public meaning as understood by the people who ratified and accepted it, you have to know what they meant. And then you have to ask the question, well, what do they mean by under the jurisdiction thereof? And then you come to a completely different view of
which is what?
Oh, see, on this one, on birthright citizenship, at that time, if you actually ask the originalist question, which is, you understand the Constitution as a contract. It's a contract between the people and the government to limit the government and to say what rights people have and what rights they don't have. But the one thing you don't do in a contract is let the people enforcing the contract rewrite it. If you see the problem there?
Yeah.
If you and I have a contract, but then you say, oh, well, my smart lawyers, the justices, can tell you what the living meaning is. It changed, but you get to change it. Who's going to get screwed?
So that's not
you.
That's not a question of
me.
Honesty, though, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, how so?
It is. Because if you honestly discuss what a constitution is and its purpose, honestly, the honest purpose of a constitution, going back to the revolution, is that we decided that government was untrustworthy, that it was by definition going to violate your rights. We believe under our idea of revolution and the declaration that you are a creature of rights. But if you're a creature of rights, then you ask honestly, who will violate them? Honestly, it's other citizens against which the government protects you.
Correct.
It is other countries who will violate your rights. But maybe most importantly, the government itself, which will violate your rights. And that's the purpose of a constitution. It's to protect us against the government itself, to constrain the government. It's a contract between the people and the government. And if you let the government rewrite the contract, they're obviously going to violate your rights and obviously screw you over. Right? This is the whole point. Honestly, a constitution cannot be living, can't be living. It's bullshit. It can't be something that the holders of power can rewrite, or they will simply violate your rights. It has to be meant as the original meaning of the words, as people meant to constrain the government. So you have to ask the question, what did they really mean at that time?
So let me ask you a question. This is adjacent to that or tangent to that. So there are 9 Supreme Court justices. There's no, there's a mechanism for increasing or decreasing the number of Supreme Court justices. Harris wanted to increase the number of Supreme Court justices. We all know why. What I don't understand is, and I'm not obviously a constitutional scholar, I don't understand, why should there be like left-leaning or right-leaning judges at all?
Right.
Like, why not just,
Yeah, the problem with all these things, the basic question that a constitution answers isn't what the policy is, it's who gets to decide it. The Constitution tells you the decision maker.
Right.
And how we determine the decision maker and who has control over what and how this works. The problem is that the justices have to be picked in some fashion. There has to be a mechanism. And we don't have a perfect mechanism. We only have imperfect ones. So what we do is we allow the president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, and it's meant to be advice and consent. It's now just consent, but it's meant to be a conjunction of the two. And the idea is that it will arrive at people who truly are supporting the vision of the Constitution.
You mean,
but that's no longer true.
If you balance the right and the left. So when I
well,
watch,
see, there shouldn't be a right and a left. There
Well,
actually
yeah, I
literally
totally
shouldn't
agree.
be. But you see, it all depends
Yeah.
on what you think. And I might have spoken too bluntly when I said that living Constitution wasn't honest. Let me step back a bit.
Okay.
And when I teach this, I don't actually teach it that way. I'm just telling you what I actually think.
Yeah.
When I teach it, I do it very differently. Because if you understand the original argument with the nature of a contract of what a constitution is, you also have to understand that throughout the 20th century, this alternative idea came about, and you have to take that idea seriously, and you have to evaluate what you think. And the idea of living constitution is that the dead hand of the past should not constrain a democracy. The Constitution is owned by us. It was written by us. Even if you didn't write it personally, you actually did in a theoretical way. It's yours, you own it, and you can change it. And we can amend it. But there's an idea that amending it is entirely too difficult. And in the process of applying it to new things, it should be living in the sense that the beliefs of the current people, even about the definition of, say, equality. We used to think equality was much more limited. We come to believe it's much more expansive. The Constitution protects equality, but equality itself has shifted in meaning, and that should be recognized. In other words, the dead hand of the past is giving us the finger. And the way we deal with that is we have justices who are committed to the ideas of the Constitution, which can broaden over time, and they recognize that. Now we have to be able to trust them, and this is the question you're getting at: is how do you pick ones that we can trust?
Okay.
That's a problem.
Okay, so I don't know if you're frustrated, but I watch those hearings when Brown or whoever goes up there, and it's just, I don't know what a woman is, ask about. Like, the whole thing is how to evade. It's not to say what we truly believe, which I don't understand why that doesn't disqualify somebody instantly.
Yeah.
What am I missing? They become political theater of what's expedient and how to become the Supreme Court justice, as opposed to an honest mechanism to figure out how justices are going to rule.
Yeah, I think if you ask that question honestly, which we are, it's become a political show. It is actually fundamentally dysfunctional.
So why can't they just say, nope, you're not answering the question honestly,
there's
you're
a
out?
little bit of history here. It goes back to Robert Bork, actually. I remember when he was
I
Bork.
read Slouching Toward Gomorrah. That was a great book. I remember that one.
He was in high school. I was in high school when that happened. I actually met him personally right after he was borked. Yeah, it's this interesting.
I love it. It's become a verb.
It's become a verb. I don't want my name
awesome.
to become a verb. I don't have an answer what to do about it. I think court packing is a terrible answer. Even Joe Biden himself said it's a bonehead idea. That's a direct quote. Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought it was a terrible idea. It is, in fact, a terrible idea. The problem is that a lot of people think, well, we should have an obviously excellent answer for everything. Sadly, we do not. Democracy is simply
Messy.
the best system we have.
Yeah.
It's not good. It's just better than the other ones.
Yeah.
The reason that people are now criticizing the court as an institution is that the institution shifted to being originalist rather than living. So they want to just downgrade trust in that institution. That's what those attacks are about. And honest journalists have been saying that. I'm not the only person who thinks and says that. It's relatively obvious, actually. But when I met Judge Bork, he had just been borked.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to ask him this question, because I think this is actually just one of these really fascinating questions of life. I always wondered if he was being honest. And you ask him the question. He went up in front of the Senate and told the truth.
He was a strict interpretationalist, wasn't he?
Well, in a sense, more of an originalist, but
Originalist.
yeah, he believed that you
Strict originalist.
should
Yeah.
look at the original intent, even
Correct.
more than just the original public meaning, and he was very clear about what he thought. And when they asked him what he thought about Roe v. Wade, he actually told them, which you point out accurately, nobody has said since. Even Clarence Thomas himself
Right.
did not represent his accurate views about
Right.
Roe v. Wade when he
Right.
spoke. He said that he hadn't really thought about it, which was not exactly
He lied.
potentially believable. But he did that for a reason. But
Right. To get right.
because
To
you couldn't be
become-
nominated. You just
correct,
couldn't.
to become
just-
Supreme Court justice. It was the
it was
ultimate.
utterly impossible after
Right.
what happened to Bork. And RBG did the same thing, was known as the Ginsburg rule. That you
Correct.
just won. Say, okay, so, but I always wondered about Bork himself, because he's such a remarkable sort of stalwart figure. If you ask him this question, if you knew that if you went and told the truth, you would not be the thing you wanted the most in your life, which is to be on the court. But if you knew if you lied, you could get it. And if you had said to him the week before, you have a couple days to think about this, what are you going to do? I really want to know whether he would have lied.
Did you ask him?
No.
Oh, what a shame.
But, I think the answer, and I'd like to think it,
Uh,
that the answer is no.
yeah, that's. What would you say? What would you
See,
say?
now, and this is an interesting way of phrasing it, because I like to think his answer would be no, because I like to think he's better than I am.
Huh.
And I think he's better than most people. But that is a not simple question to answer.
Yeah.
But I do know that this movement actually allows people who don't want to lie anymore to not lie anymore, and
Yeah.
that's good.
Let's linger on this because I think it's important. That kind of radical honesty is really a shield. It shields you from anything coming in because you have an integrity, a sincerity, like a kind of sincerity that you can't penetrate. From the Roman, put two pieces of clay together to hold it up to the light, see if you can see if it were broken. That kind of honesty, I would argue, is a virtue, because if you got the thing that you wanted,
Yeah, right.
you
Yeah.
wouldn't be the same person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. But the problem with the current day, I think, is that people are made to make that choice far too frequently. Even in medicine now, say you want to be a doctor. As I understand it, in the white coat ceremonies that they do now, you have to say a lot of things
Right.
about gender that many of the people who want to be doctors don't believe. You have to say a lot of things about systemic racism that I know a lot of those people don't believe. And you're forced to make a choice. You can either lie and be in the profession you want,
Yeah.
or you can stick to the kind of honesty that you're referring to, but you can't be a doctor anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And this is terrible. And
Yeah,
it used to be
yeah,
that
yeah.
way in academia. And this is my hope, actually. When I was a
Yeah.
graduate student, it was really clear that the people who were right of center, libertarian, conservative, or anything right of center, made a choice. They either didn't pursue a job in the profession, which is most of them. They decided just not to do it.
Yeah.
And the ones who decided to roll the dice on it, the odds of becoming a tenured professor are very low to begin with. I think it's 1 out of 4 people who start doing a PhD.
Surprised if it's even that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, people fall out at different stages. And people take
fall
PhDs.
out. I was going to say, yeah.
When people who take PhDs, they don't get jobs. We
Yeah, yeah.
overproduce by about 3 to 1, I think. But if you're a conservative, the odds go way down. So people either hit it the whole time, or they try to fit in the very few conservative circles where they're
And
available.
there aren't many of those.
That's right. So you're living this very strange existence as a conservative under those circumstances.
Do you
and
consider
trying to
yourself a
navigate.
conservative?
Well, here's the thing. I didn't know for a long period of time, and it became more and more clear to me through my time as a graduate student, as a professor. I'm not sure, I can't give you a year,
Yeah.
but I fundamentally realized at a certain point that the answer is yes.
Really?
I actually, in fact, am. Yeah, I think
Wh-
that,
How do you define that? Like a
um,
soul to conserve the civilization?
yeah,
Or is it like a?
this came up just in class a couple days ago. I'm sitting on a Coleman Hughes class. Coleman's
Oh
this
yeah,
really
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
thinker. And it was about the nature of having a father in the household and the changes that happened from the early 1900s into the current day of fatherlessness. It's really quite remarkable. And this has happened across American society and different groups. And then some groups have avoided it entirely. And there's certain groups that just have these tremendously tight-knit families, and the rest of society not so much anymore. And it's very hard to explain the full scope of it. But societies who take this very seriously, and this is true in Indian culture in the United States, it's true in Jewish culture in the United States, it's true in different subcultures, but the culture broadly has had the tremendous negative effects of not having fathers living in households. And then there's this fascinating study that shows that it's not necessarily the household that you grew up in, it's the composition of the neighborhood you grew up in. So even if your household doesn't have a father present, if most of the households in your neighborhood do, you still do pretty well. And the reverse is true. If you have a father, but the other ones don't. So it has to do with these broad social effects. And someone was saying, oh, wait a minute. So you mean that what I do in my own household is not just about me and my children, it has these broader social effects. And the student hadn't really thought about it that much. We think of individualism. What you do affects you. It's nobody else's business. It doesn't even affect anybody else.
Oh, so that's why you're not a libertarian.
That's why. Yeah. And I said to the student, I was saying, is this idea that your social responsibilities beyond yourself are an important thing that an adult realizes. One of the differences between children and adults is you're an adult when you realize that you have the responsibility of what you do in a broader sense to other people, to your wife, to your children, but also to your society, to your friends, everything. And you realize that you have responsibilities as well as rights. And the moment you take that quite seriously, you're a conservative.
Would the
And that's why I'm a conservative.
counter argument for that be that kind of asking you to maybe curtail is the right word or a similar word? Your behavior limits your sovereignty.
It does limit your sovereignty. Yeah.
So then,
your sovereignty is limited.
right? So then,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be a question of whether or not you should
Yeah.
like what would be the first principle that was operative there?
Oh yeah, no, this is where you get into really interesting thought, and there's a lot has been written, discussed about this, and the difference between liberalism and conservatism, especially libertarianism. And this is the difference between conservatives and libertarians, where libertarians think that individual sovereignty is so valuable and important to development of the self, and development of the self is the much higher order purpose of humanity. That you that transcends your social duties.
Yeah, and so there are two thoughts, two threads in this. There's also the idea that if everybody pursues their own interest, a rising tide lifts all boats, if I may mix. So the idea is that helps society as a whole. So you must repudiate that idea
Yeah,
for your
because
idea
that's
to hold.
one half of Adam Smith. If you read Adam Smith of Wealth of Nations, entirely right. If you read Adam Smith of Theory of Moral Sentiments, it's you combine the two, that we do have these social duties. The great question, and this is the great question in the American Constitution as well. The Declaration says, and the Constitution embodies as a practical work, the idea that you are a creature of rights. Now, one can ask where those rights came from. Right? Why are you a creature of rights? I believe it's a fundamental statement of the nature of the world that I am a creature of rights. But now, once you believe that, then you have to decide why, you see.
Are you going to go to God?
I do.
Okay.
And the founders did. But if you don't, if you say these are not God-given,
They're natural rights, not natural rights. They're what? They're
well, natural rights depends on how you
Okay.
think about it. But if they are in fact God-given rights, they're also, and this is the idea of ordered liberty, which nobody knows exactly where that phrase comes from, but they think it came from George Washington himself, that God also gave us responsibilities at the same time. Rights are not merely a gift, they are a burden. And once you understand that they're a gift and a burden at the same time, then you realize that you have these social responsibilities to maintain these rights. And this is, again, this is a very conservative idea. But the libertarian idea is that rights are free-floating. You're just a creature of rights. But then you ask, well, why do you have these? If they're socially given, if they're social rights, not natural rights, and this is the big distinction between living and original thinkers. Living thinkers believe that as a society, even if there were these very influential, brilliant men who thought that rights were natural,
Yeah.
what really happened is that a bunch of guys decided that they had rights.
I has rights, you have rights, even animals has rights.
They were socially created by those guys and their influence. And as a culture, the culture decided that we have rights, and we have the rights that we accord to each other. And those rights we accord to each other can grow over time way beyond what their originators may have thought.
I don't know. I'm having a problem.
Yeah.
So I think we'd both agree that in fact, this is one of the questions I asked prison inmates in my dissertation, that some types of lives are better than others. I think we both agree on that.
Yes.
Okay. So this is where it gets perhaps a little weird. So if somebody wants to sit in their basement all day and play video games and they inherited money from a lost relative, wouldn't you, in your way of thinking about things, that would be unethical? They would have a duty to their community and their responsibility, so they just couldn't sit around and masturbate to pornography and play video games all day. Even though we both admit that some types of lives are better than others. I mean, clearly I would think it's far better if the guy were like getting a job, okay.
Yeah, now there's a real difference whether you say that because they have a duty to do something with their life and their abilities, the government will make them do it, or as a society, we should make them aware of it.
Right. No, I'm certainly not saying the government should do it. I'm assuming you're not saying
neither do I.
Okay.
But I do believe that it should be brought to their attention forcefully that
like government messaging?
Well, no, really just through our educational system, that education would bring this to their idea. Well, public schools are their own failing problem. But
so I guess that's another conversation.
Yeah. But yes, even I think in public schools, all of these ideas should be discussed. It shouldn't just be taught as if you're an entirely free agent. These ideas at least ought to be in the air. Certainly at universities, they should be in the air.
We both would agree it's beneficial both practically for the society and morally if people kind of contribute.
Yeah, come to a realization that they ought to do something better. I was just having a conversation with a student whose IQ is off the charts, and I was saying that one shouldn't be proud of this. This is just a random gift. You're only proud of what you do with it.
That's exactly what I've said. Yeah.
I think he ought to have a sense of the loss, not just to himself, but to us, if he does not do that. He has a social responsibility to do that. In other words, genius is a public good. And if you actually believe that genius is a public good, which I do, it doesn't mean we can seize it for our own uses. Though we did in the Manhattan Project. Those boys of the Manhattan Project weren't asked to show up at the Fermi Labs in Los Alamos. They were told and locked in for 2 years at the lab. So now that was an extreme circumstance. But
so correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to put words in your mouth. There's another thing operative in your worldview, and that's a kind of consequentialism.
Ideas have consequences, and therefore, to answer your question about what public schools ought to do, they should portray the full range of ideas and have these things be discussed about the nature of ethics. Because if ideas have consequences, then you should recognize that it's actually very important these ideas are in play.
So for the genius, it blows my mind that Elon Musk is the number 16th Diablo player in the world. He just it completely blows my mind. But for the genius. So I'm hesitant to descriptively categorize that as a public good, but clearly that would be better if it were in service to humanity. Yeah. We both agree on that.
Yeah.
And undergirding your conservatism is it has to be a kind of consequentialism, like kind of utilitarianism more specifically.
Yeah, all right. Well, it has elements of that, but it isn't really fully utilitarian.
It's deontological or what?
Well, there's a deontological principle, there's a principle in and of itself, or the virtue of itself, that you recognize that and so many ideas floating around here. But if you go back to natural law isn't just the idea that you are a child of your creator and therefore have duties to your creator. It's also the idea that if you actually look at the world in a purely secular way, you will come to the same conclusions. If you ask the question, is man a free creature and a creature who's equal with other men? You don't need to believe that God has told you this. If you look around and observe the world, and this is part of the idea of the founding, you will come to the same conclusion that natural rights are both understood theologically and empirically at the same time. There's no contradiction between the empirical world. And the same thing is true of people. If you let them think this through in an environment where honesty is at play, and I can say things honestly to students that there's different beliefs here, but the superior one is that you realize that you're a creature of some social duties. Then they can recognize. Karp was just talking about this. We had Alex Karp here at UATX a couple days ago, and he was saying that the problem with Silicon Valley is that people think the best thing they can do is create some basically useless consumer good that they make money from. And he's saying this is nonsense, of course. The best thing they can do is create something socially productive in an intentional way. And that's why his company,
That would comport with
Palantir.
your conservatism.
Yeah, that's right. Palantir is a patriotic company by definition.
Yeah.
The purpose of the company is to protect the American way of life for the reason that it promotes superior values, that it promotes liberty, it promotes equality, and is in fact, and has been in fact historically, a vehicle for the promotion of excellent values, liberty and equality, not just here, but in the rest of the world. Once you recognize the truth of that by observation, then you realize, oh, Palantir is a good thing. And if people are intentionally doing things that are socially productive and not preferring to play video games all day in their basement, then
I just threw that as an example, but
it's a real example.
yeah,
This is what a lot of people do these days. The rise of pornography in video games has encouraged a lot of people who are young to think that that's the meaning of life, which is a sad, sad piece of business. So this is where I agree with Karp on this, that if you ask the question, are some values better than others?
Well, clearly the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. And if you have a university world where the implicit answer is no, and it's considered sophisticated to think it's no, and the goal is to become a pointless, sophisticated person, the goal of education is not to become a pointless, sophisticated person.
You've also thrown society into some kind of a relativistic sewer.
Yeah, that's right. And you've also made your society weak compared to
Totally.
competing societies.
Yeah.
And if you actually look at the world in a realistic, again, honest way, and you say, oh, I look at the world and I'm an honest person, and we have no enemies. I see no enemies. I see no competing ideologies. I see no ethno-nationalist states. I don't see a rising China that is devoted to the absolute authoritarian rule and racial superiority of their people and the dominance of the world for the good of Han Chinese, which is blatantly, obviously true to anyone who has eyes and is honest. And to say that, no, we have no enemies. This is absurd. To say that the Islamist movement, and Islamism is the political movement to make the world Muslim by force. It's not all Muslims. Most Muslims want nothing to do with it. They want to accommodate to the rest of the world.
And we have to
some
say
period
that
of time.
every time we do this. Yeah.
But there is a very, very powerful movement that believes in violence to these ends. And those ends are horrifying to Americans. Those ends are women don't go to school and they're subjected to their husbands, and that they throw gay people off buildings. And the idea that we have taught undergrads in America that it makes any sense to say gays for Hamas or gays for Palestine is force-feeding poison.
Yeah, I just
to
told
these people.
Jake in the last interview that's an IQ test to see who.
But you see the dishonesty.
Yeah.
Anyone who can,
Yeah.
any professor who can walk past that and not try to correct it is a dishonest person. It's open dishonesty to let people think that that makes sense, to not inform them that the people that they are lauding would kill them. This is suicidal. This is what Gad Saad refers to as suicidal empathy. Yeah. Which is why someone like Gad is extremely important, which I've said publicly many times, because he is remarkably important, because he's honest. And of course, Gad is a goater. And we understand this. He believes that the emperor has no clothes and honest people have to laugh at the emperor and laugh at Harvard's Flaccid Johnson. And if you can't laugh at that and goad them, then you're doing a great disservice. And I actually tend to agree with Gad on this one. This is a debate within UATX, by the way, of how goading one ought to be. I think I like a jibe as much as anybody, and I think every once in a while you have to deflate the expansive egos of academics and their idea that there's some elite person who has to be listened to by definition. And look, what I'm saying is definitionally true because all the other academics are agreeing with me. It's hard to beat that with just pure reason because people aren't listening to you. So with Gad and other people, and he's just particularly good at it, if you use humor to make the emperor's nakedness be funny, that actually is an important part of the current cultural world. We have to be able to do that. And it's also honest. Laughter is very honest, as you know, and that's important.
Yeah.
So while we're talking about conservatism, libertarian, do you consider yourself to be a libertarian?
No, I consider myself to be a classical liberal. I'm an atheist. I make no, I have libertarian sentiments. I believe in a balanced budget. I really don't care what consenting adults do in their own home. I couldn't possibly care less. I don't think it's anybody's business. I don't think it's the state's business. But what's interesting is so many people consider me a conservative.
Yes, right.
But
No,
I don't
yeah,
consider
right,
myself
right.
a conservative. So you can identify out of your sect, but you can't identify out of a political.
Right.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that I've been trying to think of a word for the people who are in the mainstream, utterly reasonable left, who believe in economic redistribution and much more pacifist than I am. They believe in rising kinds of equality that can be very good. They have very many reasonable arguments. But if they're interested in honesty and open inquiry, and they want to take a position about Israel that's utterly reasonable and not, or about gender that's utterly reasonable, they've been thrown out, of course. So those people are now conservative. So Barry Weiss now is bizarrely the person who got the, I hear, longest standing ovation in FedSoc history, the Federalist Society, is a liberal lesbian. How did that happen? Except that now she's a conservative, which makes, she's not, you're not.
No.
So many people.
Well, because there are so
not,
few of
except
us.
there's so few. But
And-
is there a name for that group? The people who are mainstream liberals that have been pushed
I
to
don't
be
know.
considered conservative?
I honestly have no idea. I mean,
I don't have a name for it yet,
yeah,
but it's a very important category of
yeah,
people.
I mean, I also think that it's as I've said repeatedly, the fault line is upon who's authoritarian, who's not. I think it's also, it was at Huey Long's, you become what you hate. And then it's the anti-fascists who are themselves fascist. It's a weird time.
It is indeed, yeah, because coercion has become the currency. And this is another way of explaining what we're doing here in the movement, UATX and the broader movement, is that we believe that nothing should be coercive. If you can't persuade people, you're not right. So shut up about it.
Yeah.
But we have no coercion in class or outside
That's why,
of class.
that's why you need free speech.
Yeah.
So let me just
Yeah, that's
real quick tell you
Yeah.
something I've been thinking about a lot. I've been influenced by David Deutsch, the physicist from Oxford, and Brett Hall. And I've been really thinking about reframing this whole debate. I used to always my framing for it was cognitive liberty. Now I have a totally new framing of it. Okay. I think you're going to like this. I think you're going to start using this. Tell me come back in 6 months. Tell me when I come back, tell me if you use this. Error correction. We must preserve the method of error correction. That's neither a conservative nor a liberal idea. You don't have to appeal to any values. It's an empirical way of thinking about things. Blasphemy laws block the road of inquiry. They do not preserve the method of error correction, political correctness. This is a value-neutral way to think about the problem of how to construct institutions and societies, a legal apparatus that we would need. That's my new framing of the situation and the problem.
I very much like the error correction.
It's good,
I need to
isn't
think
it?
about
It's
this because
really good because it's true too.
Yeah, the whole idea in my center here at UATX, which is about social science, civic life, economics, politics, history, the whole idea is that if you are empirical, that rises above ideology. Data and evidence and good history are not liberal or conservative. They're just making the argument. And that is the way, I think, to rise above ideology. But it all is about error correction, which if you don't have debate,
ultimately you can't have error correction. Yeah, I'd also argue. Yeah, so I'd also argue democracy and free markets are methods of error correction. But the most important thing is freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Those preserve the method of error correction, and anything that shuts them down, we can de facto say bad, wrong, don't do it. We can avoid it.
Right. And the same is true about religion as well. Christians don't believe that anyone should be forced into anything. It is a
Correct.
free will doctrine. It must be a free will
Yeah,
doctrine.
you have to.
And
That's
therefore,
why
you have to allow.
That's why Jerry Falwell believed Mother Teresa was going to go to hell because she wasn't born again, right? She didn't choose; she was just born into the religion. So you have to
Yeah,
kind
I
of.
suppose that's right.
Yeah, you have to
But
make that conscious
yeah,
choice.
it's a very specific sort of idea. But in general, you must be free to choose, not just in economics, but also in religion, or none of it has any value
Absolutely.
or meaning.
So that's why I think bringing speakers into here,
Yeah.
in which we spoke about this, having debates here, like actual debates.
Yes. Okay, let me wrap it up with two
Yeah.
things. One is the nature of debate. The Austin Union here, I've spoken many times about this. The reason that real universities must have debate is that it is the only way to correct lying. If a professor
Error
is
correction.
free, there it is, to misrepresent without correction, if they know they're not going to be corrected, which is the situation on campuses many times, it's freedom for fancy. They can say whatever they want because they know no one's going to correct them. But if they know, pretend you and I are going to debate in public, which might happen one day. If you know for a fact that you can say whatever you want and no one's going to correct you, or someone who agrees with you is going to walk up, you can say whatever nonsense. But if you know that I'm about to rip you, then you tell the truth on the way in. This is what debate is for.
Two things. One, whenever I do an event, I always say, if you disagree with me, come to the front of the line. Second of all, I was going to do an event in New College in Florida. They had Judith Butler come. They asked her if she wanted to debate me. She said no. They asked her if they wanted to debate Rufo. She said no. And then they had a moderator, and they're all softball questions taken from kids with blue hair.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
like,
Curated questions.
they're
curated
like you
the
said, they
questions
write them
ahead
down.
of time.
And
Yeah,
so
right.
I think that is not only is, okay, the method of error correction isn't preserved.
Right.
So already I don't need to say anything else.
Yeah,
You
right.
just-
It's
the method of error
universities are
correction,
dead
so you can
at
make
that
an
point.
immediate judgment about that. Right.
Yeah. There's no trust at all if there's no error correction
Correct.
involved. You need the mechanism.
You see how that's like
Yeah,
parsimonious way to think about
Yeah, I got to think about this. Last thing to say then, to tie it up, you were asking about Judge Bork and about the selection of justices.
Yeah.
What happened after Bork was borked was that
Love that.
every person who wanted the chair had to answer the question that I wanted to ask him.
Yeah.
And they all answered it that they wanted the chair. And they refused to answer any questions after that. And there's no way to make them.
Right.
And then the partisanship took over. And now it's just a mummer show. It's not anything important at all. It is not a mechanism of truth seeking. And it's not recognize the fundamental reality of what's going on here is that there are two ways to read the Constitution, even if you read it. And you have to address this honestly. You can read it as a living document that evolves over time, that embodies the values of contemporary Americans, and you trust the justices to interpret this and to change it over time, and you allow them to do this. And this can be good in a certain way, and many people are persuaded of it. Or you can read it in an original way, that it's a contract between the people and the government. It must be understood in the original meaning, and the last thing you can do is allow justices to change that meaning because they will distort it against the people. That is not discussed in the Senate anymore. That is not something that is considered a debate, though it is the debate and the only debate. And it's very important to say that even though I have very strong views about this, when I teach it, my students don't know that, unless they've already run into something that I've said on something like this. But I didn't even used to do this at all. But I would teach it in this open way. They debate back and forth. The people who think it's a living document and can argue it very well, they still get A's. And that's the way universities are supposed to run.
They should run,
but they don't.
For sure.
And that's the dishonesty and that's the corruption that has occurred at so many different levels. If there's anything about this whole conversation, it's about error correction and the ability to be dishonest. The institutions themselves now not only don't correct error, in my view, it's way worse than that.
They institutionalize dishonesty.
And there it is. And that is the problem.
Yeah, they punish people who are honest and speak their mind.
Yeah,
or say, I don't even say, you don't have to be honest.
Because
just say, I don't know.
No, but you have to know because there is an obvious known answer. And
they know it.
Better say it.
And they know it.
Yeah, imagine they have no doubts.
Walking into class and walking through your life.
And they know it all. So, and this is why the movement has happened. This is why it has gained strength so quickly. This is why there are now nearly 10 different institutions in America that are promoting the same idea within the civic thought movement. It's why it's going to continue to grow. It is going to steal the students. It is going to take the money.
agree.
It is going to be the intellectually vibrant location that
100%.
students want and faculty want. And we have this conversation 10 years from now. It's going to be an entirely different world within a new academic ecosystem that is going to be beautiful. That's why I joined this movement.
And on that note, I can't thank you enough. Hey, did you know only half of you watching are subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button to keep the videos coming. Thanks.